Yes, the last time we talked about Joseph and his brethren meeting their brother Joseph, and he revealing himself to them because they didn't know who he was. But please, first of all, remember to like, share, and subscribe these videos, as well as turn on your notification bell, so when I upload, you will hear. So we left off where they had returned home to the land of Canaan to their father. They were able to take Benjamin back and Simeon, and they all returned back with the good news. And I can well imagine all the hoopla in the land of Canaan, people, all the neighbors seeing. They probably didn't live as close as we do now, however. They live together usually in communities and whatnot, and here comes these fine Egyptian horses and all this stuff, and oh my goodness, it must have been something. All the neighbors, I can see them peeking through the windows, and children running out behind the horses and the chariot, because Joseph had sent a chariot for his father with horses. Pharaoh the king had said, send a chariot for your father, send a wagon, and the land is before you. In other words, do whatever you want to do, and so on. And so Joseph had sent all this stuff for his father. He sent changes of clothes for him, and money and food, and you name it. If Egypt had it, he sent it. So anyway, they got back to the land of Canaan, and I guess they went into the house, and maybe Jacob, these J's. I'm going to call him Israel, because that's what God called him. So if you hear me say Jacob or Israel, we're talking about the same person. So they got back there, and maybe he was at home, maybe he was in his bed, maybe he was in the backyard doing gardening or whatever. And they said, Joseph is alive. Maybe Benjamin, the younger one, maybe he was the first one to run in there and give him the news. And he was like, don't do that to me. I guess he was thinking, I tried, I prayed, and I cried, and I got over it. Now don't, put more salt in this wound, don't make me. They said, no, he is alive. He is the second in the land of Egypt. He is second to Pharaoh. There's none between him and Pharaoh. It's him, it's Pharaoh, and then it's him. Come and see. And I guess when he saw the horses and the chariots and all the food, and I guess it showed him the clothes. Maybe they changed. Maybe they put on some Gucci, or, maybe they had the most expensive perfumes and all that good stuff. And I guess that convinced him. He said, my son is alive. Joseph is alive. I will go and see him before I die. And of course, they told him about all the riches and all the power that he has. Oh, I guess it must have been something, to experience something like that. So anyway, I guess they talked and talked and talked. I'm pretty sure that one of the questions that Jacob might have asked is, how did this happen? I thought he was eaten by some wild animal. But then on the other hand, I guess there was too much excitement and joy and everything. We'll talk about that another time. So after a certain period of time, they went back, because that was the instructions that they got, to bring Jacob back to Egypt. And God told Jacob, it's okay, you can go down to Egypt. That's the kind of relationship that God had with Israel. And he and the whole family, I guess after a period of time, we don't know, maybe a couple of weeks or months or whatever, until they got themselves together, because then they had to, I guess, maybe sell their house or lease it or whatever, or leave it with some good neighbors or good friends or whatever. Anyway, they went back. They're on the way down to Egypt to meet his beloved son, who was the prince of Egypt. So they got there, and I guess when they were a little way off, someone maybe went ahead and told Joseph, your father is here. And I just visualized the whole greeting. You know, I can just imagine the happiness, you know, how did this happen? How did this happen that you were sold? You were sold as a slave, and now you're in charge of the whole land of Egypt? It doesn't make sense. And I guess there was a topic for a lot of conversation between these brethren and their family. And according to the scriptures, there were 70 souls that went down to Egypt from Canaan. All family, children, grandchildren, wives, and, you know, all that sort of thing. And so Joseph was able to meet with his father, and Pharaoh told him, just give them the best. And Joseph gave them the land of Goshen, which was, I guess, maybe a good fertile area. And it had to be a couple of acres because these are 70 people, and they came with their cattle as well. And they were able to live there and see each other and be a part of Joseph's life. And at the end of how many years, I'm not sure, but the time came when Jacob, whom God turned him Israel, was about to die. He got sick, and they sent and they told Joseph, your father is sick. And Joseph went over there to see his father, and his father, you know, talked to him. He blessed him. He blessed them all, and he told them, prophetically told each of them what their lives were going to be like, who they were going to be, and things like that. Some of it wasn't very, you know, wasn't nice, but he told them. And of course, there was that hierarchy. Back in the days, there was this respect for somebody like Israel, being the father and the spiritual leader. And the children were raised that way, you know, to respect and to honor Jacob, which is the way it's done in many parts of Africa. The children look up to the elders. The elders are the ones who give guidance, because back in those days, they didn't have the police force and all that kind of stuff. So the elders and the leader were the leaders in the community, and the young men were taught by the older men. The young women were taught by the older women, and that's the way it was, and it worked. Anyway, so Jacob passed away after blessing his two grandsons. As a matter of fact, when Joseph took his two sons, he had two sons, Ephraim and Manasseh, to be blessed by his father Jacob. Jacob had placed his right hand on the younger son's head, which the tradition was that the older son was blessed, not the younger son. So Joseph was a little bit, Dad, that's not the older son. Just put your hand. He said, no, I know what I'm doing, you know. And sometimes I think about these patriarchs and these prophets back in the days, how God led them. And, you know, and it just worked. It worked perfectly, because you cannot be led by God and it not work out the way it's supposed to, if you are obedient. So anyway, Jacob died, and he instructed them to bury him back in his homeland. So after Joseph buried his father, after 40 days, they took him back to the land of Canaan, and they mourned for 40 days and whatnot, and they came back and so on. So his brethren, they got together and they said, you know what? Our father is gone now, and maybe now is the time Joseph is going to take vengeance on us for what we did. And so they told him that the father said that he should not do anything to them. You know, he strictly warned. And so Joseph said, don't worry about it. He said, you may have done this, but what you meant for evil, it turned out to be for good. He said, God orchestrated this whole thing so that I could come here and prepare and provide for you and your families. And so he convinced them that he loved them, and he had nothing like that in his heart. He was just happy that he was able to see his father and to make peace with his brethren again. And so they continued to live in the land of Egypt, in the land of Goshen, with their families, and they multiplied. And they grew, and everything for them grew. Until by then, Pharaoh had died. After how many years, I don't know. But Pharaoh had died, and a new king was, installed. And this new king didn't know about the history of the children of Israel and Joseph and all that stuff. And maybe he didn't take the time to find out. All they knew was that these people, they're not Egyptians, they're Hebrews, and they're growing. Their wealth is growing. They're expanding, their families, their nation is getting bigger and bigger. And if we're not careful, very soon, they will overtake us. So you know what? We're going to have to put a stop to this. And that is when the slavery situation began between the Egyptians and the children of Israel. Now, there's a lot in between there, how it began. They decided to kill all of the male children. You know the story about Moses. God preserved Moses for a purpose. Like he always do. God has a purpose. He has a plan. And that's where the whole, story about Joseph and the children of Israel. And then Moses was born, and the children of Israel were in captivity by the Egyptians for over 400 years. And God sent the deliverer. He was born. Can you imagine? He was born at a certain time. God had his whole plan. Moses was born. He was supposed to be the deliverer. He could have been killed. But God preserved his life. And the thing is, he lived right there in the palace. Right there in the palace. So when God has a plan, no one can thwart that plan. So may God help us to trust God and not to yield unto our own understanding. The Bible says, in all our ways acknowledge him, and he shall direct thy path. May God continue to teach you and to guide you, and allow yourself to be led by God. And remember, like I always said, Jesus is coming, and he is coming soon. The signs are there everywhere before us. There is no doubt that he is on the way. The Bible says in the last days, violence, like in the days of the antediluvian world, that's before the flood, violence had filled the earth. And God said, I'm going to destroy man whom I've created. So we see violence. He said, as it was in the days of Noah, so shall it be in the last days. As it was in the days of Lot, so shall it be in the last days. And you want to read about Lot, find out what that means. Or I can tell you about that another time. About Sodom and Gomorrah, how those cities were destroyed, as well as the flood in the days of Noah. He said there was violence in the earth. There was so much violence. He said the imagination of man was only evil continually. So we see these things. We see the signs of the antediluvian world before the flood, and we see the signs of Sodom and Gomorrah. So those two events, those two situations are signs that show that Jesus is coming soon. So may God help us to read our Bible and to pray every day. God bless you. Talk to you soon.